when he joined the Army, he came through the school and I was there. And one thing we do at the beginning of each cycle is everybody introduces themselves, where they're from, that type of thing. And, he's like, I'm Francis from Orlando, blah, blah, blah. And March, Magic of Orlando. And that piqued my interest because, Magic's been gone now for a while. And I was like, wait a minute, what year did you march? He's like, 98. I was like, dude, I marched right alongside you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and teachers in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, on to my next guest, Danny Mesa. How are you, Danny?
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for being such a good fan of the show. You're one of the first people who reached out to me, and I really appreciate your support.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm happy you're doing this. This is such a great tool for all of us in the music community.
Well, that's all I hope to do, is just try to provide a place where people can listen to maybe people they don't get a chance to meet or talk to or hear from, and gives them an opportunity to kind of be a part of a bigger thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Danny, can you do me a favor and introduce yourself for the listeners? Tell everyone what you're doing.
Sure. My name is Danny Mesa, and I am currently completing my 12th year of active duty service with the U.S. Army. I'm a musician for the U.S. Army, currently stationed in Hawaii, part of the 25th Infantry Division Band. And there I serve as a trombonist. I have conducting responsibilities. I also serve as a drum major. I assist with training in our unit and a whole host of other administrative duties. I'm also, prior to that, I was on faculty at the U.S. Army School of Music, where that's our first stop for soldier musicians once they complete basic training. And there I taught the concert band, ceremonial band, and our chamber groups. I was there for about 4 years, and we trained roughly about 1,100 students during my tenure there. And before that, I was at other duty assignments. I am from Miami, Florida, born and raised, and I did my undergraduate at Florida International University. And there I was proud to be one of the founding drum majors and founding members of the Golden Panther Marching Band. We got our football team when I was in school there, and so we started a marching band, and I'm very happy to have been a part of that tradition and starting up the marching band there.
So, Danny, how did you get into music as a kid?
Well, my earliest memories take me back to sitting in the living room of our townhome, and I had these plates in front of me and a spoon, and I was banging away. I enjoyed playing what I thought were the drums back then, and so that always piqued my interest. And then later on, my parents got me a keyboard, and I started playing keyboard. I always had this interest in music. Started playing the keyboard, started hammering out some melodies, and then, but it wasn't until the end of elementary school, we were getting ready for picking out our schedules for middle school. And I saw on there the Keyboard 1 course. And I said, all right, well, let me sign up for this. And I signed up for Keyboard 1 and loved it, enjoyed it. But across the hall from the keyboard classroom was the band room. And I saw all my friends there, and they all had instruments. And it always piqued my interest. So in 7th grade, I went ahead and switched over to band. And I was in band class, and I thought I was going to play drums. And the director was kind of discouraging that a little bit because everybody wanted to play drums. And so I went ahead and I looked around, was like, well, I don't want to do the trumpet. Everybody does the trumpet. And then finally, my friend, he picked the trombone. So what we all do, we kind of follow our friends. And I went ahead and picked up the trombone. And here we are many years later playing the trombone. So that's how it got started. I got real serious about it in high school. So I attended a magnet school. It's called South Miami High. And it was a great program, still is a great program. And I had a director there, Alfred De La Rosa, and he's the one that really pushed me into music because of the way he was teaching, the way that he made this program really flourish. And he gave me an opportunity to conduct one time, and that was in 10th grade, and I did El Capitan March. And from that point on, I knew that music was going to be a part of my life. And as they say, the rest is history.
So I'm curious about growing up in Miami. I know there's a good high school band tradition there in South Florida, but was there anything else about being in that community that sort of helped?
Miami is a very rich community in the arts. And, in my household, for example, I'm Cuban, so we grew up with a lot of Cuban music, a lot of rhythmic music. So I think that did have an influence in me as well.
Did you do much jazz, Latin music when you were a kid?
I did, yes. In high school and in college, obviously we had the jazz ensemble. And when I was in college, at the time, Arturo Sandoval was working with the university. So we got to play a lot of his music from his big band album. And we also had Michel Camilo come in.
Oh, cool.
And play. And there was a lot of Latin influence while at FIU.
So what took you then from FIU to the Army Band of Hawaii? Let's talk a little bit about this journey. So maybe your decision to join the service, was that right after college?
I actually taught band for 2 years after college. And, the military was something I always wanted to do. I wanted to serve in the military, and I was exploring different options. I was going to do the National Guard, so I could do that part-time. But then, the Army did have an enticing package, if you will. They were having bonuses at the time and college loan repayment and all that. And so I said, well, if there's a time to do it, it's going to be right now. And I went ahead and joined. And as we all say when we join the military, it's like, well, I'll do the first tour and then I'll move on. And then, honestly, assignments started getting better. I was enjoying what I was doing. And one thing led to another. And then, I started working at the school. And then once my tenure was coming up at the school, Hawaii came around, and here we are today.
So let's talk about. We'll come back and revisit all of these things, but let's start back at that first job teaching band. And so you got a music ed degree?
I do, yes.
And so what was that job like, and what were you teaching?
I was doing a high school band, so I was doing concert band, I was doing marching band. We also had a jazz band. There was a music appreciation course, and there was also a guitar course. And that was a great experience, a good program. We had about 40 some odd students in there. And we brought the program to perform, at the time, O Magnum Mysterium was well known in the repertoire, and had the students perform that, and they did a great job and really instilled some music, some real high level of music into that program. And same thing with the jazz band. We brought the jazz band together. But, one of the interesting parts of that was, how do you feel the marching band with 40 students? And that was exciting. The first year we did a Pirates of the Caribbean show. And one of the things we did, thanks to the band parents, they went ahead and built a ship and as a prop out on the field. And we were able to work our show around that, and ended up having a great time putting that show together. So it was a great experience.
Was it tough to leave that job for the Army?
It was, because you started something, and obviously in a way you're leaving halfway through, but it was a tough decision. But the program continued on, and here we are today.
One of the questions I like to ask all my guests is, do you have any lessons that you learned from your teachers in middle school, high school, that you ended up using in your teaching? And so now you were only there for 2 years, so this will carry on in the Army too, but are there any lessons that you're still using from your teachers?
Oh gosh, yeah. My high school band director, his way of rehearsing an ensemble was unique. He knew absolutely how to draw music out of the ensemble and from the students. And that's one thing that I carried with me, and I still use till today. There's a certain way that music is performed, and I don't know I can't pinpoint exactly in words, but through his rehearsal methods, he made it happen. And it's almost ties into the we're not going to let this go type of mentality. And we made sure we performed the music. We didn't beat it to death, but we performed the music in a way that the end product was that of not only the composer's intent, but what we really wanted the musical experience to be. And his approach to teaching as well was, it was a little laid back, which is great, but he also imposed a trust in us to make sure we were ready. And that's another thing I took with me as well. Right now when I'm in front of an ensemble, I like to I trust the ensemble that they're going to come to rehearsal prepared. So when I'm planning a rehearsal, I'm planning on making music and not just learning parts. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was very valuable experience. My high school band director, he really did set a foundation for future educators and what teaching should be.
All right, and so you joined the Army, and your first assignment was what? What did you do first?
So my first assignment was at Fort Lee, Virginia, and I was just trombone player, fresh out of basic training and out of the school. Mm-hmm. And I was a member of the ensemble, and my commander at the time, he was very generous with the podium time. So he actually allowed me to. He knew that I was interested in conducting, and he gave me an opportunity to conduct as well. But Fort Lee, there's a lot of community relations, and aside from all the engagements on post, and I was there for about a year and a half at that duty station.
Yeah, sure. So now tell me about that. So when you finish basic training and you get your assignment as a musician, are they sort of just looking at your instrument and then putting you where they need to be? How's that coordinated?
We have an office that does that. We call it HRC, which is Human Resource Command, and they have I don't know the exact system, but they have a system, and they forecast out where they're going to need musicians based on who's either moving, retiring, etc. And they go ahead and they place you on that assignment. Now, when I came in, I had the option of picking my first assignment, so I gave them a list of where I kind of wanted to go. And when they came back and said, yeah, Fort Lee is an option, I went ahead and penciled myself in for that. And that's how I ended up there. But yeah, they forecast these assignments out based on movement and who's retiring, who needs to go where. Rank will also take a place in that later on as you progress through the ranks. So it's almost like an algorithm. So
now, once you left Fort Lee, is that when you went to the Army Music School?
No, not yet. So from there, I went down to Fort McPherson in Atlanta, which the base was closing down. And so I was there for another year and a half. We closed that base down, and we moved up to Fort Bragg. Now, here's a little tidbit about Fort McPherson. Half of it by now is owned by Tyler Perry. It's the Tyler Perry Studios. So you could actually see our old buildings used in the Walking Dead. It's pretty funny. But yeah, so we moved up to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is in Fayetteville, just south of Raleigh. And there continued the same thing, performing on the trombone. We also did a little bit of conducting as well. And then, but while I was in that particular band, that was the Ground Forces Band, the Army Ground Forces Band. Mm-hmm. I also had a little side project that I started, and that was a jazz trombone quintet with rhythm section. Mm-hmm. And the inspiration for that was the Capitol Bones out of DC. And so I started that group, and we arranged a couple tunes, and we took that group out on the road to do a community relations tour with some of the universities in the state of North Carolina and Virginia. And that was a very fun experience putting that together. We made some great music, had some great times performing in that group. And then once I completed my tour, or I was in the middle of my tour in North Carolina when I applied for the job at the school. And then that's when I moved up to the Army School of Music.
What was that like? How were you identified as someone who would be an instructor there? What did you teach? And I'm really curious about how military musicians are trained at the Army Music School.
Oh, absolutely. Well, so we have a portal where we announce job openings, whether it's for trombone instructor, operations, or drill band. All that is listed on that portal. And so I was looking through the portal, and I saw the job opening. Originally, it was just to teach contraband. And so I went out and applied, and I was selected. I was hired. So I moved up to Little Creek, Virginia. That's where we have the Army School of Music, and the Army School of Music is housed on a Navy base because we also share a location with the Navy and the Marine Corps. They do their music training there as well. So I got hired. I got there, and like I said, I started off with contraband. Then I went on to teach the ceremonial band as well, and then we also taught the chamber ensembles together. But so you were asking about how military musicians are trained, and so after basic training, every person that has a job in the Army goes to what we call advanced individual training, an AIT course. And for us, of course, will be music. So those students, regardless of component, whether they're active duty, reserve, or National Guard, they come to the School of Music. And for 10 weeks, they receive instrumental lessons. They work in a large ensemble like a contraband. They get trained in ceremonial band. It's like I was telling you earlier in our conversation, our different style of marching. So that's where they receive that training. They work in smaller groups. And then they also receive additional military training and various other courses to get them ready. And then after 10 weeks, they graduate. And a week or two later, we get a new group that comes in. But their training every day is similar. They start off in the morning with physical fitness training. And then from there, they came over to ceremonial band, and we had a 2-hour block with ceremonial band. And we always start from the very beginning. We always start from the very beginning, posture, how to hold the horn, how to march. And even though we have varying marching experience, we've had, folks have been in DCI, folks who have never marched before, everybody starts from the ground level. Because like I said, it's a different style of marching. And so we all start together. And then by the end of the course, the ceremonial band aspect of it, they're able to perform a full marching band ceremony, complete with playing, colors forward, colors back, complete with bugle calls, complete with marching the formation all the way around the field. So that's kind of like their capstone or their final exam, if you will. And then with the contraband, it's the same thing. With the contraband, we perform. When I was doing it, we would do a little mini recital at the end of the cycle or midway through the cycle. And this is the first time that these musicians ever play with one another. We get what is a bunch of strangers in a room and we make music. And this is the first time they play their instruments too in over 10 weeks because they've been at basic training. So it's fun because there, you begin to dig into the fundamentals again, intonation and working on articulation and all that. And then we perform the ceremony. And then for the small groups, there's another course that they take. So in the traditional field, to kind of give you a little background, we have, brass quintet, we have a jazz combo, which these are all subcomponents of the main group. It's made up of the main body. And so with these students, we do the same for them. And their tasking is to produce a show and a cycle show. And so the brass quintet will go off and put a performance together. The jazz group, one time we had a Latin group that put a show together. So all that training, it's happening in those 10 weeks. And then they graduate, and then they are off to either their active duty assignments, or they come back and do, or they go back to their National Guard or reserve unit.
What's the audition process like? So
for the audition, the simple answer is you contact one of our band liaisons, and these are musician recruiters. So they're from the band field, and they, there's either video involved. They'll come out and meet you if they're in the area, and you audition for them. There's two parts of the audition. You do the prepared section, and then they send you what's called a quickly prepared, which is kind of like sight reading material. You receive that the night before, and then you go ahead and schedule your audition. You do your audition, and then if you pass your audition, then you're turned over to the recruiting office, and then they take care of the rest of the process to get you off to basic training. So it's the regular, prepared material of varying styles, of course. And then you have your quickly prepared materials. And that's it in a nutshell for the audition process.
So now, I guess, Danny, this is where I'm kind of missing the boat here. Because I know that, like, if you win an audition for the Old Guard or for the field band, you're not going to the Army Music School.
That is correct, yeah. If you win an audition for the Fife or for the U.S. Army Band or the field band or the West Point Band, you'll report to those duty assignments upon completion of the basic training.
What kind of musicians are being recruited into the Army bands? I mean, are we looking at college graduates, high school graduates, people in college?
We've auditioned all.
It just depends on if you can pass that audition.
Correct.
I see. Cool. So that seems like a pretty good gig to be an instructor there then.
Oh yeah, it was great. And, like I said, we also have musicians that are, our trombone instructor and trumpet instructor. And it is a great gig. And the part that I enjoyed the most about it was seeing the growth from, day one all the way up to graduation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, as an educator, that's where it really matters right there, seeing the growth in the musician. And one thing we do as well, we also give back to the students. So the faculty, they get together and they put on a show as well. The instrumental folks do, whether it's a woodwind quintet or the brass quintet or the brass band, and, they perform for the students. So the education is constantly happening while you're there. And it's very, like, now on the other side of it, now that I'm back out on the field and I'm seeing these former students of mine join me out in the ranks, out on the field, it's a great feeling, because they're bringing to the field, what we taught them, and it's creating this great working relationship. And it's nice to see that. Nice to see your students go back out into the field now and join you, as peers in their ranks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's cool. So I want to talk about the I guess the stratification of the bands, the levels. So I know that I talked with Sarah Corey and I talked with Francis Frankie. And so we know that, like you mentioned, the field band, Pershing Zone, the Old Guard. What are the other premier bands, the top level?
Yeah, so top level groups are, the Army Band in DC. We have the Army Field Band, which is almost the touring arm of the Army Bands program. And then we have the West Point Band out at the West Point Military Academy. And the Old Guard, as you stated. So for the Army side, those are the premier bands. I see.
And so now, are there regional bands, or does it then just go down to the unit bands or the field bands like you're mentioning, like the one you're in?
Yeah, so I don't know if regional bands is the correct term, but so each, I want to say almost each major installation has an Army Band program.
All right, so tell me about Hawaii. So that's a pretty good posting.
Yes, it is. That's everybody's question, is like, how's Hawaii? And Hawaii is great. It really is. And, we'll start with the work stuff and then we'll talk about the beaches. But,
let's not do that. Don't do that to me.
You're right. So, the assignment is very unique. It's great. Because we are in a division, there are more ceremonies that happen. So we're out in the field more. But, our jazz combo, for example, when there are military balls and events like that, they spend quite a bit of time out in Waikiki, performing at these military balls at the hotels out there. So, but it's another great thing about Hawaii, and, putting all the jokes aside, is, we do have historic sites here. So I've been able to perform on the Missouri, which USS Missouri is where they signed the end of the war. End of World War II with General MacArthur. So performing on that ship is really amazing.
I bet.
And just being on Pearl Harbor itself I always get the sense of when I get on there of pride, and it's amazing that we get to perform at such a historic site. We've also done performances for, to celebrate the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. So there's a lot of veterans out here. So we do a lot of events with the veterans, and that is something that, I will always keep in my heart, keep in my mind when I do leave Hawaii, is meeting all these veterans and all these events that we have done for veterans.
Yeah, I bet.
So it's a very unique experience out here, very unique assignment, because, what obviously all the history that Hawaii has. Like I said, we do perform a lot of ceremonies. That's one of our main gigs out here, is because there's a lot of units out here. This is a division, and so it gets a little warm in the summers. The summers get a little long when we do our ceremonies, but well worth it, again, because of all the other activities we get to do out here in Hawaii.
That's cool. So where are you in Hawaii?
So this is the island of Oahu. So we are 25 minutes or so north of Pearl Harbor. The base is called Schofield Barracks.
Okay, yeah,
and it's more located in the middle part of the island. That's where we're located. And then, we have the Navy and the Air Force down near and on Pearl Harbor. And then the Marine Corps is off on the east side of the island at Kaneohe Bay.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about Hawaii, it's sort of the epicenter of the Pacific, the military in the Pacific,
That's another thing that keeps us employed, if you will, is there's a lot of commands out here, so we do things at other bases as well, just because of higher headquarters where they're located and all that. So that we're constantly performing for all these higher echelons that are also located here in Hawaii, because you're right, it is a very strategic location.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the history of Hawaii is cool. Of course, all the Pearl Harbor, World War II stuff. I'm a bit of a history nerd, so I like all that stuff. And
Oh yeah, as am I. And I remember when I first moved out here, we moved out here September of 17. So on Pearl Harbor Day, that following December, I was driving to work, and I would see where the planes flew from, and I was struck. I was looking up in the air, and it's like, wow, on this day, at this time, really, when I'm driving to work, this event began and started, and it's quite a feeling.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about what it is that you do in the band. So now you said you told me that you're a trombone player, of course. You do some conducting with the group, and you have training responsibilities in addition to being the drum major. Can we kind of go through some of that and what that looks like for the listeners?
Sure, absolutely. So as far as the trombone playing part, I play primarily in the brass quintet. That's primarily the group I play in, and we perform anywhere from, like I was saying, on the Missouri to a ceremony, to we've done school programs as well, especially with elementary kids. We have a little program we do for them as well. We get the quintet out there, so that's a performance aspect of it as far as on the trombone. As far as conducting responsibilities, our commander, he's shared some of the responsibilities with me. So it ranges anywhere from conducting ceremonies out on the field to, for example, we're getting ready for our holiday concerts right now, and we're also getting ready for another concert on the lawn. So I'll be conducting on that concert as well. And similar to what we do in the classroom, come in, rehearse the band, get the group ready, and then as far as the drum majoring, I stand out in front of the band with a big mace, like we see on TV, and drum major the band. But part of those responsibilities, drum major now kind of ties over to the training. Kind of like I did at the school. I lead some of the training here to make sure that the band is fresh, if you will, with their marching style, marching technique. So we always put out the best product at these ceremonies. Other training things that we do. So up until recently, I was the head of our training department, if you will. That's the civilian term for it. And what happens in that training department, we have a training plan. So we map out, does every group have enough rehearsal time? We also make sure all the soldiers are, they have a physical fitness test on record. If not, we need to schedule one. Same thing with the weapons ranges, the whole military side of the house. So make sure we have all our military training that we need. So the training office, we make sure that all that was, not only updated, but make sure the schedule was always set. Making sure that each group had enough rehearsal time, make sure that all the performances now. So, a performance, once they come in and they put on the calendar, we make sure that, okay, this group's performing for that. Do they have enough time to rehearse? Is this going to work out? So all that happened in our training office. So it wasn't just training out on the field, whether, checking out marching or rehearsing a band, but it was also the administrative side of the house in our training office. And then, so I did that up until recently because I just changed positions, if you will. I have a different role that I'm satisfying now, but that's what I did in the training office when I was head of the training office. But I still continue to work with the marching band. As a matter of fact, tomorrow when we get back to work, we're gonna have a drill band session in the morning. We got to get ready for what we call a division review. We're gonna be marching basically the entire division around the field. So we're gonna brush off our marching a little bit and start preparing for that. And then in the afternoon, we're going to come back after lunch, and we have a full group rehearsal. We're going to get ready for our concert on the lawn. So there's always something going on.
So how about the conducting with the Army Band? What are you doing? How much do you get to do? And how big a part of your assignment is that?
Well, it honestly depends on what we're getting ready for. So if I'm conducting a ceremony, normally we'll have a rehearsal or two to get together for, and we prepare what we call pre-music, which is usually 4 marches. And then the rest of the sequence is pretty standard for the ceremony. So I usually have about 1 or 2 rehearsals with the ensemble. Sometimes it's the morning of to prepare before we take off. But for a more involved concert. So this concert on the lawn, or our holiday concerts that are coming up. The commanders, I sit down and we discuss programming. And so for this concert, for example, I'm doing Light Cavalry Overture, the Fillmore arrangement. I'm also doing 3 movements out of the Lincolnshire Posy. And then one of my other colleagues is going to do Tekeli Shenandoah, Liberty Bell March. And then from there, we're going to kind of change a little bit and do more of the, more pop music with the ensemble. We're going to feature our singer a little bit. So it turns into kind of a pops concert from there. But so it depends on what we're getting ready for and what the concert is that we're getting ready for. And once we just sit down and decide programming, then depending on the repertoire and the programming, we'll divide up the time on the podium to get the group ready.
All right, Danny. So obviously you're pretty well traveled here. You've done a lot of different things in your time in the Army and as a band director. What lessons have you learned that you'd like to pass on to others?
I've learned throughout time, and this goes all the way back to, back in college and all that. You need to slow down, really need to take things in. And that's one thing, if I could always go back, especially my time in college, I would go back and I would slow down a little bit, really take it all in. Because now I'm left going back and calling a lot of my old directors and chatting with colleagues and asking questions that had I really taken it all in the undergrad. And as I've gone on through my career, I wouldn't need to be asking these questions. So we all need to slow down just a little bit, try not to do everything out of the gate, and really have a plan, whether it's you're up in front of a concert band or a ceremonial band, always have a plan, always be ready to make sure the students are receiving valuable information. We're not up there floundering a little bit, that type of thing. So have a plan, slow down, and always reach out to colleagues. And, that's something that I do to this day. So it's an ongoing lesson learned, if you will. Always reach out to folks, always reach out to directors, always ask for help. If you find new friends at a conference, talk to them, see what they're doing. Because there's a lot of things you learn. And one great thing about this podcast, Mark, is that the fact that, like you were saying, everybody on here is unique, whether they may come from the same, let's say, university job aspect. Everybody has a different background. And there are many times that I sit back and I take notes and I listen to folks and I say, oh, this is great. One time I was listening to, I believe it's John Dennis from Texas State, and he was laying out these music ed tips and just tips. And even though I'm not in a music education classroom right now, all those tips apply. And so a funny story, I listen to the podcast when I'm on the treadmill Monday mornings. And that day I paused the podcast and I waited till I got back to my office because there was stuff I was going to write down. And so always, everybody's got different ideas. Everybody has different techniques. Everybody has different backgrounds and experiences. And so that's one lesson there that's going to be ongoing for me is I'm always going to try to seek out information from many folks.
Danny, there's one other thing that you do that I think is interesting for my listeners, and you do a series of short conducting videos, and do you release one every week?
Just about, yeah.
And what are those all about?
So really just topics that either things I discover on my own, it's like, well, how can I make this better? Or if I'm looking through a conducting book, it's like, how would I show that? Little things like that. Or sometimes, people have asked me questions about certain ways of conducting. And so that's how I get my topics for the episodes, if you will. So I sit down. It's called 60 Seconds of Conducting because there's a funny story behind it. So last year, I told myself, well, I really want to do this conducting thing. And I even thought about a podcast, but I was like, no, you need extra equipment. So I said, how about a conducting video? And so as luck has it, I sat down and I started recording something. And then I get that alert on my phone and it says, oh, you're out of memory space. Delete a bunch of pictures. And so I was trying to do that and it wasn't working. And I could only record like 2 seconds of a video. And so I said, well, let me use a computer to do this. And I was like, well, but then I had to splice videos and add it because I wanted to try multiple angles and all that. And none of that. I was like, all right, let's try something easy. So I found the Acapella app I remember I had it, and you could record multiple angles. And so on there, again, this is a whole luck thing. There's I believe it's like 15, 30 seconds and 60 seconds of a free footage you could record before you had to pay for the membership. And I said, all right, well, let me try this 60 seconds thing. I don't want to buy a membership right now. And did it a couple times, and it worked. And so 60 seconds of conducting was born.
I see. That's cool.
And yeah, and it's one of those things where, like I said, I'm able to do different camera shots if I wanted to. And I think 60 seconds is enough, to pique somebody's interest. And that way they could watch it while they're just scrolling through their phones. And I continued doing that and, find little topics here, whether it's working on the wrist, working on entrances. And one time I was going to stop. I said, all right, well, this has been fun. But then, I get people reaching out saying, hey, I enjoy this. So I went ahead and continued the series. And we have I have another one coming out this week. And it's something great. And it's my way of giving back to the community because, a lot of people have played a role in me getting better. So it's just my way of giving back, and people seem to enjoy it. So I'm going to continue as much as I can.
So Danny, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
As long as the students are learning, are getting something out of it, and it is fun for them, that's healthy competition. And it goes both ways. As long as the director too is having fun with it, they're enjoying it, and they're getting something out of it. That's the main thing about competition. If we're just competing for the sake of the trophy and nothing else, that's where it becomes unhealthy, because then that's when we just become focused on judges' comments. That's when we become focused on rehearsing 4 times a week now instead of 2. So as long as the students if you go back and sit with the students and talk about the judges' comments and say, okay, this is what the judge said, here's what he's talking about, how can we clean up that phrase and make it better? How can we clean up this aspect of the drill and make it better? And the learning is happening, then that's where the healthy competition really comes into play. And you know what? The students will appreciate that versus getting to the end of the competition cycle or circuit, if you will, and the students saying, oh, well, good thing that's over now.
So this is a big question. And in recent weeks, I've been thinking a lot about how it doesn't really apply the same way to everyone. How do you find a work-life balance in your career as a musician?
Well, one thing that I've done, I have 2 kids now. And so one thing I've learned is that if we get to about the 5 o'clock mark, 5:30 mark, I punch the card and I'm home, make sure we're having supper. I'm with the kids, put the kids to bed. And then at night, if I have some free time and there's something that I do need to catch up on, I go ahead and take care of that, whether it be looking over a score or any little rehearsal planning I got to do for the next day. That's when I do that. But I make it a point that when I get home, it's, I punch the clock and I'm with my kids. There's a lot of things I do during the day. And this, of course, is a learning experience for all of us. One thing I do during the day is first thing in the morning, I have my note of or a list of notes and items that I need to accomplish. And that keeps me on track to make sure that I don't have any loose ends at the end of the day. Also, if there's a day that I know is going to be a very complicated day, like for example, on Tuesday, we have rehearsals in the morning block and we're going to have a rehearsal in the afternoon block. So that day, office hours are basically out the window. So, and we have a training meeting that afternoon too. So office hours are definitely out the window. So what I'm going to do that day is I'm just going to get there a little early and work a little bit during lunch. We have a very long lunch period. We're very grateful for that. But Tuesday is going to be one of those days where I'm going to eat my lunch and then go back to the office and catch up on some work. That way, I don't need to bring it home with me. But another thing that I tell myself too is that there are days where I am going to take my full lunch period. I'm going to go sit at a coffee shop, and I'm probably going to read a book. But we need to identify that. The person needs to identify what's going to work for them. And then last but not least, I've developed this over the past couple of years. It's if something can wait till tomorrow, it's going to wait till tomorrow. Because then that's when we start making mistakes, whether it's on memos or typing something up. If it could wait till tomorrow, if you are that burnt out at the end of the day, it's going to wait till tomorrow. And that's what we do. And then another thing that I used to help myself out with is I have a little sticky on my computer at work, and it's got the acronym ATD, and that's attention to details. And so that reminds me of, before I shoot out this email, before I shoot out this memo, or plan. I'm going to look it over and make sure there's no mistakes, because mistakes start compounding, and then that's when we start staying at work later. And then I also do on that same sticky, there's also this thing called the 2-minute drill. And that for me is, I get up from my desk, I look around, I check the board, I check my bulletin board, I look on my desk, and I check to see if there's one last little email that came in. That way I know when I wrap up the day and I go home, I know in my mind is at ease, because I'm done for the day and there's nothing lingering, or I don't have to say, oh gosh, I forgot that. Should I turn around? I'm done for the day. And finally, coming home, my wife is very, very supportive of this job. And, so I always give back to my wife, and she wants to just sit down and watch a little TV. I do that. And that creates such a work-life balance. That is great. You come home and that family obviously is first. And then my job, although I do not have to do, let's say, marching band rehearsals, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights, there are evening performances and there are weekend performances. And what I do to balance that is I get the family out there as much as I can on these performances. That way, even though I'm working, the family's still out there and we're having a great time together.
Danny, from your perspective in Hawaii there with your lovely beaches, what are the challenges that are facing music education, and band, and how can we best meet them?
I think we're in the right place in the sense that we have a lot of dedicated educators out there. We have a lot of dedicated teachers. We have a lot of composers out there that are dedicated to the craft. And I think it's working hand in hand. I think that if we start, I guess, introducing music more at the elementary level, and again, I haven't seen elementary music in a while, but if we start introducing maybe band and chorus a little sooner, I don't know, maybe that'll have more of a long-term effect with keeping our bands fully staffed. And then from there, it'll trickle up to the college level. I don't know, maybe that's one way to approach that. But, one thing that I do appreciate, or that I'm seeing out there as I do visit schools with our program, is that you have a lot of both students and teachers that are hungry for the band program, that really do enjoy what they do. So hopefully we keep that going, and that'll, again, work its way up to them becoming future educators themselves.
Let me ask you a question kind of related to that. That's not normal for my guests, but how do you view the role of military bands in the greater band community?
The community looks up to and really enjoys and really supports military band programs. There are many times where either at a conference or if we visit a high school, their first question is, how's it like, or what's your day-to-day like, or this is great, when's your next performance? So they do appreciate military music. And we could tell, at least I could tell from when I was working at the school, the recruitment, and the students that we were recruiting, obviously we made an impact enough by us visiting either universities or high schools where they've said, hey, that's what I want to do. And I want to be a musician like those musicians up on stage.
All right, Danny, I can give you a time machine and set it to the date of your high school graduation. What advice would you give yourself?
I remember my first semester after graduation, and that was one thing I told myself. I had practiced more. I passed my audition, got into school and all that, but I remember going into my first, they told us, hey, we just hired a new trombone professor. And it's like, oh, great. And sure enough, it was Mark Hetzler, former trombone player with the Empire Brass. And it's like, oh, okay. So I'm like looking him up, like we did back in the day. And I saw heard a few recordings, and I was like, oh gosh. So went into my lesson, and I was not very prepared. And, but that led me to work overtime on the horn to, make sure not only did I meet, Mark's curriculum, but to make sure that really I was doing what a trombone player should be doing, and that's performing great music. So I would that'll be the first thing I would tell myself. And then if you want to transition into college, one thing I would tell myself, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is take it all in. There were times I was in a rush to get home after class or after rehearsal, and no, you gotta take it all in. Really spend that extra couple minutes there, talk, speak to the professor a little more. So yeah, slow down and take it all in.
All right, Danny, if you had a choice, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or band that you would want to conduct or play in or listen to?
One piece that just comes to mind, or I've got two pieces that come to mind, and one is Maslanka's Child Gardener Dream, and Hindemeth Symphonic Metamorphosis. And I don't know if I could say why, but I've conducted a Symphonic Metamorphosis before, and there's a certain feeling at the end of that piece that I always had, especially once we finish the march. And it's the gratification of that. It's like, all right, if I had to do one more piece, I think this would be the piece. And then, same thing with Maslanka, and anything Maslanka, really, you go on this journey in his music, and, you finish that piece, and close the curtains, roll the credits, however you may want to think about it. And that's, Child's Garden Dream is one of those pieces where I could conduct that and say, all right, let's call it a day.
Okay, Danny, how can people get in touch with you?
They could just find me on Facebook, Danny Mesa, and you'll recognize my profile. And that's one way. If not, you could always email me. It's mesadanny@gmail.com. You go on Twitter. It's @dmesa_conductor. And I believe that's all the platforms.
Danny, thanks so much for coming out on the show.
Absolutely, Mark. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.